Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our session on how to reimagine work and rebuild post-crisis. There have always been innovative companies and innovative leaders in the world challenging the status quo and pushing the bounds of what's possible. But what's interesting about this particular moment in time is that the transformation timeline has really been condensed, and we're all reimagining things right now together. So no one would have asked for a global pandemic to come along, so we had the collective opportunity to reimagine how work is done, how work is managed, how HR is organized, but here we are. I'm reminded of a quote I saw at the very beginning of all of this earlier in the year that said, "The best time to change an engine in the car is when it's parked." And I would guess that all of you on the call are finding that now is the time to start looking through a new lens, shed some legacy thinking, and really reimagine how things are done in your companies. Which is why I brought on a couple visionaries in HR and business leadership to talk through some of these big innovative ideas, as well as some actions you can take to help lead your business out of crisis and into the future. This webinar is presented with our partners at Hitch, a talent mobility platform that accelerates productivity and performance of existing talent. We have the founder of Hitch on with us, and unfortunately you can't see her webcam. We're still going to see if we can get her on the screen so you can see her face, but her name is Kelly Stephen Weiss. She's also the Chief Innovation Officer of Here Technologies. So she's the founder of Hitch, who we're presenting this webinar with today, and the Chief Innovation Officer at Here Technologies. We also have Robin Stencil, Chief Solutions Officer at OutMatch, and Kellyanne McGrath, who is the VP of Client Success at OutMatch. So I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today. Again, I'd like to say thank you for being here. Maybe you don't leave the session today feeling quite as zen as this guy on the slide, but I do hope that we can provide you with a place to pause, regroup, and find some clarity so you're ready for the road ahead. My name is Brianna Harper, and I'm your webinar host. I'm also a resource for any questions you have during the webinar or after the webinar, really at any point in time. We've planned about 40 minutes of content for you today. After that, we're going to open it up to Q&A. So I'd love to hear your questions, hear how you're navigating. So please chat into the questions queue anytime something comes to mind. After the session, I'll send out today's slide deck as well as a link to the recording. If you have any questions that don't get answered or you think of something after the session today, please reach out. You can find me at on social at OutMatch ACM, or you can also email directly at bharper@outmatch.com. Oops. Really quick, before we begin, I just want to show you what's coming up in our Future of Work series. Next month, we're going to look at how diversity has changed for better and for worse since the crisis began, and we'll talk about ways to ensure you're on the right track, specifically in diversity hiring. Then in July, we'll look at digital transformation and how companies are modernizing their hiring practices to align with that transformation. And finally, in August, we'll revisit candidate experience, which is a topic that we talked about earlier this year in February, right before things really started to change. But now is really the time to look at all the things that have changed as we've gone from record low unemployment to record high unemployment. And we have a new reliance on digital experiences. So we'll talk through all of those topics in the coming months. I hope to see all of you back. One last thing, today's session is valid for 1 professional development credit for the SHRM CP or the SHRM SCP. So look for that activity ID from me at the end of the webinar. These are the voices you'll hear in our discussion today. I briefly introduced these ladies at the beginning of the call, but I'd love for each of you to tell us a little bit more about yourself. And since we have 2 Kellys on the call, Kelly Stephen Weiss, let's start with you.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today and talk about a very, very important topic, about particularly about the future of work and talent. I, throughout the course of my career, referred to my career more as a jungle gym, taking a lot of different opportunities. I think I was born in the wrong time. And a lot of the things that we will talk about today, I have captured in the book I just released on April 7th called The Inside Gig, which was written with my co-author, Edie Goldberg. So again, I look forward to the discussion, and I have a great a co-panelist in Robin. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Robin, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so I am the Chief Solutions Officer at OutMatch. So I work with our commercial teams, our product teams, and then inside really us, we look at talent and growing OutMatch. But my career has been spent in mainly HR, different industries such as retail, transportation, and technology, and a variety of HR roles. And most recently, before joining OutMatch, I have led talent for a large global manufacturing company. And much like Kelly, I don't think I've had sort of this ladder of a career, but it's been definitely a journey and a wandering journey at times. So really excited about this topic and to hear what both Kellys have to say.
Thank you, Robin. And Kellyanne McGrath is going to be moderating the discussion today. So Kellyanne, can you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. I am the Vice President of Client Success at OutMatch. I've been at OutMatch for probably about 4.5, 5 years now. And I would say similar to Robin and Kelly on the call, I would say I've been involved in a couple different pieces of HR over the last 10 to 15 years of my career. And really my position at OutMatch, I feel like has been the culmination of all of that, right? So I get to really be a Jane of all trades that I think of at my role. And really what that is my team partners with mostly our enterprise clients. So clients that are really kind of range anywhere from mid to large size, and in some cases smaller too on the other side, where we really partner to understand strategy, really help them maximize the solutions we offer, but more importantly, align with their talent needs. So it's been an interesting journey as we think about kind of pre-COVID to where we are today and how we start to think about post-COVID. So I'm excited to really talk to these two ladies and yourself, Brianna, just to really understand more of best practices that can be applied and things that are tried and true that you can start to really put to use today, not really reinvent the wheel completely, but just think differently as we come to the other side of this.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. Kellyanne, Robin, Kelly, I'm so excited to have the three of you on the call today. So let's get going.
Awesome. I think as moderator, it's my job to kick us off, right, Brianna?
Yeah, go ahead. I've got actually 2 rapid fire polls in here. So Kellyanne, if you want to talk through some of these, I'll go ahead and launch it. That way we can
So we'd love to get your input from the audience, really how you're thinking about this. So is your company working to reimagine HR today? And what does that mean to you? So if you could go ahead and take some time, just select one of these options of where you think really your company falls into. Yes, we're working to reimagine HR. We will be making some changes, but we're not sure what those changes are yet. Or you're maybe considering it, you're thinking through it, not really sure where to start. And then it's really too early and you're looking to learn more from today's session.
Yeah, I'm seeing the answers come in. We've got the leader in B will be making some changes, but not sure what. So I'll just give it another second or two and close this down, and then we'll go right into our next question. All right, let me share this so everyone can see the answers. So like I said, B was the winner in this question. And before we really talk through, what that means for our conversation today, let's go ahead and launch the second poll that we have, just so that we really have an understanding, where everybody is at on the call today.
Awesome. So similar to that last question, if you fell in that category, no matter which one you selected, but if you were to reimagine HR, how ready or receptive do you feel your organization would be to taking that step? So from these selections, are you ready and pretty open to change? And is your organization kind of comfortable with that? Are they somewhat ready, maybe somewhat open to change, so almost indifferent, not ready at all, or maybe not sure?
All right, it looks like we've got the leader again in B, somewhat ready, somewhat open to change, which makes sense because not everyone's going to be on the polar extremes here, but we did want to be able to gauge, what the mindset is in your organization, so we can really speak to that. So I'll close this down and share the results. All right, now Kellyanne, does that reflect what you see when you're talking to clients?
I would say yes. So I find this not surprising, really, when we think about the different types of organizations we're partnering with. And we talk to, like I said, different sizes of organizations, but also different industries. And those different industries have been impacted by COVID in different ways, right? Some not so great, and some that are actually still growing. So I'm not surprised to see that most of the folks on the call are falling in kind of that middle range for both questions. And we'll be sure to kind of get some of the inputs and examples and even best practices from both Robin and Kelly on these specific topics as we continue our discussion today. And hopefully you'll walk away with, ways that you can start to think about it and get your organization more ready so you can apply some of these best practices.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for participating in those 2 quick polls. Kellyanne, I'll hand it over to you for the discussion.
Fantastic. So I know we're talking a lot. I'm sure a lot of you folks on the call have been listening into some webinars just around how do you navigate this pandemic. And as we're seeing this shift, kind of some states really lifting restrictions, people starting to really prepare for that future work. And we all probably were in some way, shape, or form prior to COVID. We were all preparing for that future, right? And then we had this crash and we landed, and then almost considered then what, right? So I'm wondering from you, Kelly, as you were putting this webinar together, you talked a lot with us about kind of this experience of whiplash. Can you expand on that? What are some of the implications of businesses being in the same spot on the curve at the same time?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. So I'd say that we all got thrown in the deep end of the pool at the same time, which is really interesting because we know in regular business cycles, we have peaks, we have recession, we have what's called the trough, and we have recovery. And we're sort of, but all can be at different points in that business cycle, depending on, many different conditions of the industries in which we're in. And so this really puts us all at the same starting point, which is very interesting because when in the course of a business are we all at the same starting point? So those businesses that went into this change not ready or trying to build, how they would react in the economy where we were, are now have a chance to jump ahead. And so we've heard of whiplash. We say that unemployment was at 3% and now it's at 20% in an 8-week period. That is a huge changing condition for everyone. So we were all in talent scarcity. Now we have, a lot of talent out of jobs and job instability. And so the very, very different conditions. But it is a chance for many businesses and talent leaders to think ahead and kind of catapult forward despite the hurdles that we have today. So I really encourage us to think about, if you're sitting there on the fence thinking, well, I'm sort of somewhat ready, but I'm open to change, this would be the time now to address your workforce strategy and actually maybe have that chance to catapult forward.
That's fantastic, Kelly, too. And I would echo that, right? Just in terms of using this as the opportunity, seeing almost the glass half full, and how can you really capitalize on the increase of candidate flow in the market to really identify top talent for your organization, or at least start to think about what that top talent could look like. Robin, I'm curious from your perspective on this too. Have you seen, or are you experiencing the same in your network in terms of this whiplash and the similar implications of businesses that are going through this?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of people being able to leapfrog a little bit from where they were, right? So maybe my organization or my HR organization wasn't as mature as I wanted it to be. I can kind of take some of the lessons that we had pre-COVID, take what I've learned, jump ahead. Because if you think about it, a lot of people are starting with either a smaller workforce or they're starting to look at sort of, they've done some shedding that they're not going to bring back. And what does that look like? And so how do you start to get this new mind shift a little bit, like I was talking about, this mindset of what does this look like? And then how do you learn from, again, what's happened and not feel like, and sometimes you've got to take every step along the way. I think COVID has given us the opportunity to skip some steps and be a little more advanced.
Yeah, I find that interesting. I was talking to a client the other day within transportation, one of those hardest hits that's really feeling that impact now, right? Because we're in peak summer travel seasons. And this is when they make almost 80% of their profit and revenue in the next 3 to 4 months or so. And I thought it was interesting. My champion, as we were talking, kind of who really partners closely in TA and owns that strategy and process, is really using this time, like we're talking about, to re-engineer processes, consider the use of technology given those minimal resources, right? And trying to button that up so when the floodgates open, they are permitted to hire again, they'll really be prepared and ready to be able to sustain any of the growth, or at least rebuild that and start to grow again through the other side of this. So I think it's interesting, no matter what industry you kind of are in or what part of that curve you're at, you really can start to see hopefully the light at the other side of the tunnel and start to find a way to press the reset button and use it to your advantage.
I heard, Kelly, and I heard one CHROs liken this talent market to the stock market. Not that you should buy low necessarily. If we're buying people, it's not kind of that piece of it. But if you think about it, we're at this point where there are candidates out there that maybe 2 months ago wouldn't have considered your organization or weren't thinking about it. And so this idea of this time, even if you're not hiring, to really start the courting process and that relationship building with candidates to really make yourself stand ahead, so that when you can, you're accelerating through the process and you're not starting from the beginning at that point.
I love that. So
Yeah,
go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, I was going to say that is a great point, Robin, that some of the programs or the special things about your organization that lift your employer brand up in some way, differentiate you. And it's not just money, because I think what people start to take inventory of when we have this job instability, or what are the things about my job that I really, really appreciate or that aren't working for me. So they become more open and reflective about, hey, I really, appreciate having the opportunity to contribute in a broad fashion, or to stretch my wings, or to be learning new things. And I wasn't really learning anything. I was sort of collecting pay. So they start to reevaluate the important things to them. And you might have an offer that normally, to Robin's point, they would not have considered. So your passive recruiting, passive candidate recruiting becomes a much more viable strategy in this environment.
I love that, because I'm sure, prior to COVID, right, a lot of organizations, a lot of those folks on the call with us today, we're probably already thinking about ways to improve their employment candidate branding, right? Or improve ways along their process or their organization to make themselves, I call it sexier to the marketplace, right? And things that they were probably already starting to put wheels in motion, for example, like a digital transformation strategy. They really haven't changed. They've really been more accelerated, I would say, given everything that's going on and the way that we're not able to, we have to communicate differently, right? Today we're on a conference call sharing video cams, and the way that we're going to have to recruit is going to have to continue to leverage technology and be more digital friendly, digitally focused. So Robin, I'm curious, can you talk about other business transformations that you were aware of and that were in motion, and how the coronavirus has changed the trajectory, or how it's improved it and it's a new way of looking at old problems?
I think that experience, right? And it's not only candidates, but it's customers too. And so what is that experience we're creating for customers, and what does that look like? How is it different? If we take the candidate side of it, to your point, Kellyanne, I really think that we're almost accelerating it, but in a bit of a different way. So before, we were looking at the candidate experience to just really attract and weed in a large pool. If we've got a large pool now, the candidate experience, you can have a great experience and still allow people to sort of self-select out or weed out from your perspective. And how do you create that in a good way? I was just talking to someone to say, even in this market with lots of candidates, you should still want your candidates to walk away and say, really cool opportunity, great company, maybe it's not for me, or unfortunately they didn't select me, but you should look into that. And, that opportunity to really help build that And customers, I think, are the same way as we think about the customer experience and what does that look like, and businesses reimagining that. And all of this starts to look a little bit more, we used to think about all these experiences somewhat digitally, but they had a lot of personalized touch to them. Now that touch is not something that we're doing, or we're doing it in a very virtual way. How do we do that? What does it look like? And so you imagine, businesses are reimagining things that they couldn't. I think about health clubs, right? The whole big thing is come into the gym and work out here and have this experience and community. And now it's how do you create a community of people working out in their living rooms, but doing that with the people that you have and in a new way. So again, I've been working out kind of virtually with a trainer for several years now, but we did it through an app, and here was a video, and here's how you do it. Now you're talking about Zoom and connectivity and that reaching out and checking in a much more personalized way. And I think all of this is being really accelerated with the use of technology. Whereas before we were using technology, but we were so worried about technology feeling abrasive or cold. And we've realized by working at home that technology can be very warming.
Kelly, I'm curious too, from your perspective, given what Robin just shared and kind of your experience when you think more internally to the organization. I know you've kind of been successful in the past in terms of just finding new ways, almost creating an in-house incubator or certain ways to think about digitizing, so to speak, your processes. So I'm curious of your take on this same question as well.
Well, I think one of the things that, to Robin's point, is that we have started to look at our employee experience much like our customers, personalizing, customizing, but treating our employees like consumers. So consumers want their digital experience, their programming, everything customized to them. And so we're starting to look at our employees in the same fashion, and trying to deliver what their needs are, uncover what their needs are, and deliver what their needs are in real time. So to her point, it's to feel higher touch, ultimately. High touch is defined as it's personalized and customized to me. It's delivered in an iPhone experience, I call it, right? I get to make choices. So we've democratized a lot of the technology. And now that we're all at home, and think about it, the child comes in to kiss you on the cheek goodbye, or your dog barks and you've got to take them out. It is humanizing people because they're seeing you in your natural habitat, right, at home, not in an office setting. So it's kind of coming full circle. So I think it is a much warmer experience that we're all getting used to.
For sure. I was talking to a client the other day too, who's in a unique situation, working in grocery, right? And they're kind of a traditional organization that's been around for a number of years, and they've even seen this since they're in a position where their business has pretty much grown rapidly, right? Because our needs and the demand for what they sell is so important. But they found themselves immediately impacted with just how do they attend to their employees within the stores? How do things change? And a company that wasn't probably used to readiness for change, how to do it on a dime. And it was amazing what they've learned from that, and what they find too, and what they're focused on now is really how do they take what they learned and incorporate that into their day-to-day moving forward. So things like, succession planning was always top of mind for them. And when they went through this specific crisis, they found that some of their leaders really didn't know how to handle kind of crisis management and specific competencies that were key for success. And those aren't going away. So they're using some of this time to not only use it as downtime to re-engineer processes, but also really make sure that their people internally, their leaders, have what they need to kind of withstand any sort of crisis that could be thrown at them, and almost take what they've learned and put it into their core competency model, and then think about how they rethink about their talent strategy, succession planning, and talent reviews to hire to those new core competencies and develop to them. So I find it interesting that even those along the curve, no matter where you are, traditional or kind of new age, you have to somehow use this to infuse some sort of digital transformation strategy, even if it's small in your traditional business, and doing so in small chunks, such as using it to start with your succession planning from what you learned. So I think it's just fascinating how it can be applied no matter what type of organization you are. And as we kind of think, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think to that point, I think what's interesting are these businesses that have stayed open, if you will, like where people have to be on the front lines. I think that, and just in talking to some folks in manufacturing and in retail, what we started to hear is they're starting to think a little bit differently too about, we've got this experience that we have to create because you've got to come into work, you're in front of customers, but what about the experience do we allow, like, do you take home that we maybe traditionally have had you do in the work environment? And what does that look like? Still creating separation, but really allowing you to have that connectivity. And again, kind of maybe preparing for your day more at home than having to come to the team meeting in person. Do we do it a bit virtually before we get there? And then we all, because we're social distancing, right, come in and go into our spaces. And just how do you do that in a different way? I think it's been really interesting to see as well.
Yeah, it's also brought up the question around workforce productivity, because if you ask people if they're more productive because they were at home, I think the hypothesis was that we wouldn't. We would have all these distractions and we would get less work done. The truth is, what we're finding out from the data is that people are more productive when they're at home. They're not commuting. And the challenge is really that they may be working too long. They may not have a separation between work and life. And so mental health issues or burnout is probably more of what HR leaders are going to have to worry about than anything. But productivity has actually gone higher since people have all been at home. Think about the fact that we've also leveled the playing field, that there are no hallway chats, right? There isn't any hallway. So nobody has a better chance at the hallway chat if you were a distributed or remote employee versus everybody else. So I think there's more productivity and more connectivity as a result.
It's interesting too. It kind of brings to question also reinforcing, how do you keep those folks engaged that weren't used to working remotes? And what does that look like in terms of how does it affect your culture? So I think it brings up a couple of questions. And Kelly, I'm curious too. I mean, we started down this path already and talking about how the future of work is here, right? And it's not going to go anywhere. We're actually heading into our next normal as we're speaking. So what would you say is kind of the next future that folks should be planning for, given some of the things we've already talked about? Where else would you kind of add some value and think that HR folks should really be prepared to help guide the business toward that future?
So one thing I talk about, and it's definitely in the book, is what I refer to as the new talent operating model. So many of us learned in business school that operating model is a combination. It's fed by strategy and core values of the company, but ultimately it's structure, process, technology, leadership capabilities, et cetera. And this area around capabilities and structure, culture, et cetera, are all things that HR influences. And I think the role of the CHRO is going to be becoming the COO of the talent supply chain. So very carefully managing supply and demand of critical skill sets, understanding where you are today, forecasting where you need to go, and building a build or buy strategy against that. As we look towards the future, what that operating model could look like is flatter structure, more distributed decision making to the front line where people are touching the customer, greater speed and agility, and network of teams. On the employee experience, we mentioned treating them more like consumers, so putting digital in everybody's hands, and then being able to forecast skills in some fashion. So we're going to see things like crowdsourced performance management, more project-based work, and certainly more of an internal gig economy where we democratize work, we make it visible, we allow people more choices because we're treating them more like consumers of work, of programs, of technology. So this I refer to as a self-actualized enterprise. We're all going to be, kind of me Inc. and able to chart our own destiny inside our organization.
I find that fascinating, Kelly, too, because I was just actually, and I've been partnering with this client for a while in financial services, and they were starting down a path of thinking about customer first and really trying to apply their digital strategy and transformation. And then now COVID hit, and it really hasn't changed. It's almost like we're talking about accelerating for them. In ways that they are really starting to focus on that is they've built almost what they call pods, right? And they have what they call an experience owner that oversees the pod as this kind of expert within their certain different functional areas, but they really try to understand and hone in on what does the customer's experience look like, both internal and external customers. And then they really bring together kind of the work that's associated with really rolling that experience out. So I think it's just interesting because they'd already started down this path, but it really is speaking to what you're sharing of this kind of gig environment, more team-based, where it's these teams that come together with specialties, but that work and partner to really create the whole experience that in the hope really improves the customer overall and increases value to the organization. So I just thought that was a great example that brings to life what you're sharing and folks that are already on that path to really bring that to life.
And that becomes an employer branding opportunity, right? You know, not all of us work for Google or Apple, so we don't have that brand that carries us in the market. But if we do have some type of offering, like come here and we help you build your career, and you have more choice, and you can have broader contribution, that is a draw. That is a very attractive draw. And it's not just for millennials. You know, I'm a Gen X, and you know, my career was quite a jungle gym. People ask me all the time, well, how did you become the chief innovation officer? I mean, weren't you were head of corporate communications and marketing, and then, you know, HR for 13 years. Like, why would they ever look for an innovation officer in HR? So it's definitely an opportunity to really sell your company and be a company that looks like it's poised for the future of work.
100%. I think it also helps just with tenure too, right? If you think about those millennials who stay with a company on average 2 to 3 years and then kind of job hop to get to the next step in their career, it can really help build more of that continuity of folks staying with the organization and really infusing what they learned back into it and giving them opportunities to grow, maybe not up the corporate ladder, but to your point, through the jungle gym, right? But be their guide, help them see that.
And I think this is one of those places, I mean, we were seeing sort of research and studies saying if you're really thinking, and again, probably a little bit more forward leaning with your organization, you know, you might start to think about recruiting, not just from how do I bring people into the company, but to Kelly's point, how do I move people around? So thinking about your, you know, where a recruiter pick up the phone and call somebody in an organization and say, hey, there's a job opportunity you should be, you know, consider, because somebody externally is doing that same thing. And so how might that start to work, which becomes a little scary for people. But if you think about it, this pandemic has really given us a place to say, okay, well, let's make sure first that we're taking care of the people we've got in our organization, and what do we need to add to it by really understanding what's in the organization. So thinking about a new way of how we go about recruiting, which also helps us when we get into those times where there's such a shortage of the talent pool.
So I'm curious too, Rob, given what you're sharing, and Kelly, some of what you've shared too, this can sound a little overwhelming, right? If I'm a person who maybe wasn't already heading down a path of a digital transformation or setting up kind of experience positions or team-based work within my company, what does that mean for me, right? So as I'm starting to try to think about being more disruptive and applying some of what we're talking about into my organization, it could, like I said, it can overwhelm me. So do I need, as that type of HR leader, to gut and remodel everything at once? Robin,
No.
what are ways that you can start doing this?
No. You've had enough disruption in your business to add complexity to it at this point. I do think as you look at these things, and size of organization might influence some of this. But if you think about this, and what you're looking at, how might you maybe take a business unit, or do you take a function, or do you take a department and start to try some of this? Because we were getting ready, Brianna and I were talking, and I shared with her, I worked for a large transportation company. And in our technology group, we used to do draft day. So we really went to this idea that the talent was not your talent, Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. Manager. It was the talent of the company. And so draft day was come with your, and this was before things were really digitized, so it's much easier now, but you came with like your playbook of people, what were your openings, who were you trying to look at, and really started thinking about that. But again, on a much smaller scale, we didn't go to all 85,000 people and say, hey, we're going to look at talent in a very new way. It would have been too overwhelming. But we had a group that was ready. They wanted to try that. And as it started working and there was success, rather than having to grab people and say, please come try this, they were saying to us, hey, we want to try this. And in some cases, we were saying, yeah, but you're really not ready. And here's what you need to do to get ready. And so you really had people wanting to try this in a broader sense.
And that's what Hitch is all about, what Robin's talking about, right? And then I'll get into steps, but it is about starting small and experimenting, because that mindset shift, that talent is not owned by an individual manager, but owned by the organization, really changes the way you look at it. From a leader standpoint, allows you to tap into a much bigger enterprise than the 50 people you might own outright. That you know, everyone wants to protect their 50, but if they could tap into an entire enterprise that might be thousands of people, that really changes the game. And in terms of how to get started, just to reiterate some of the things Robin said, you know, first you got to build a business case too about what is that case for change, and experiment. Maybe set up some readiness assessment and find an organization to experiment with that might be more on the curve of ready to try something new, and set up your change plan and then experiment. Start with a pilot. Find like organizations that have talent that they might share and start sharing. And Hitch, which is a cloud-based SaaS solution for talent mobility, actually digitized that process that Robin's talking about, that might have been, and I still see it today, people trying to do this on spreadsheets or SharePoint, jerry-rigging SharePoint. This is a really powerful thing, and I'll tell you, at Here Technologies, where I was the CHRO for 4 years, we deployed this type of solution, a digital solution, in 2017. And we saved 14 million USD in the first year, and that was without having the whole organization on the platform. So every year we save north of 20 million euro on that kind of process. So it's a huge savings, and not to mention delivering a great experience to employees.
It's amazing too. I mean, because it really hits the bottom line. I love what when we were talking and prepping for this too, Kelly, how you shared, you know, you can go ahead and remodel a room and put your effort into remodeling the room. But then eventually, right, that's going to lead to that one room looks pretty and the rest of your house maybe not so much. So you're going to start to want to expand the rest of the rooms in the home, right? So a small step in the right direction with change can lead to bigger change, but almost to what you're sharing too, bite it off almost in small size chunks, right? Something that's manageable, depending on where your organization is right now in that readiness. So you started down this path too, but I'm curious, any additional advice you would kind of share with folks on just how do they overall assess that readiness? How do they really understand at what point is their organization ready for some sort of change?
Well, I built a change readiness assessment that was based on a set of factors. I'll just pick one to share, which was mindset, right? Get in the mindset of your leaders. Are they built on a scarcity mindset or an abundance mindset? And here's a set of questions you can ask. Now, ultimately, what you want to know is where your hot spots are, that you're really going to come against resistance, not so that you can say, okay, I'm not going to work with those teams, but so you have a plan on how to work with those teams. The other thing I will say is, if you experiment, like Robin was speaking about, you learn a lot from that experiment, and you create potentially a FOMO effect of everyone else in the organization who wasn't tapping that capacity, wasn't getting that savings. Nobody likes to be left out. We're all 5-year-olds at the end of the day. And nobody wants to have, their toys not get leveraged. So I think that's the other advice I would give. Start small, experiment, reassess, make sure that you go for the greatest likelihood for success first. So if you've got people that are just leaders that are much more open to experimentation, and you believe that it will prove your hypothesis and work with those orgs, go for that first, and then try to remodel the rest of the house. It's a lot easier. It actually becomes your case for change.
That's fantastic. Robin, would you share any additional comments to that too, in terms of your past experience with assessing company readiness?
Yeah, I think all of the things that Kelly mentioned are important, and sort of, picking the right leaders to do this in partnership with you. Certainly those that are more ready to do that can get some good wins. The other thing to look at is, though, who sort of do people in your organization look to? I worked for a CHRO who constantly made me take the person who was kind of the naysayer on every project, and I'd be like, oh man, not that guy or not that girl, or trying to kill me, like, why? It's just it's gonna be terrible now. But the thing that really I started to pick up from is, we were taking somebody who maybe wasn't there, but if you take that person who wants to be on top, that's the naysayer, I want to win, they can sometimes be the person when other people say, God, if that guy or that gal's doing it, I totally need to be doing it. And you can, again, sort of this leapfrog effect gets you there, because I can remember one leader saying, yeah, when you told me that, I was thinking I'm never going to do that, and then came back and said, but this is the best thing ever, like, we've got to do this more, and why isn't everybody doing it? I'm like, yeah, go tell all your friends that, right? And so how do you bring those people? So I think it's this balance of, if you pick the person, and then it's the right time and what you're looking at, right? So sometimes it is pick the person who's sort of the head of the class, who's always exceeding, who's excited about everything. You want them for some things, and that's really good. But sometimes you got to pick those people who are like, this is going to be so painful to get through, but that the impact later is going to be great.
So almost, again, going back to Kelly's point, we're all 5-year-olds, right? So we all want to be at the top of the class, and let's kind of use our employees and their personalities to work for us instead of against us.
Yeah.
And not to plug, but we have an assessment for that, right, Robin?
That's right, we do. We have we can look at, as you mentioned, we've got this crisis readiness assessment. We've got an assessment as we look at leaders and change. And we can even help you think about how do you look at people who are agile, and both from a learning perspective and moving. So, yeah.
I think this has been great. I know, Kelly, especially from your experience just in terms of talent mobility and strategies and kind of working in different pieces of the business. And then Robin, just overall in terms of your experience and some of the information you shared around really the buying side of strategy, and Kelly more of the build. I just wanted to, before we kind of open it up to questions, curious if there's any other comments or examples or pieces of information you'd want to leave the audience with.
I think from the buy side, if you weren't doing this before, I think when you go in and say, we want to add someone to our organization, it's thinking about what is the longevity of that. So is my buy, if you will, am I buying an employee? Am I buying a gig worker? What does that look like? And am I looking for someone who can just play the role for today? Or am I looking beyond today, and what are the competencies or skills that they have that are transferable as we move forward? So I think as you put all of those things together, it's what does that start to look like? And I think, to Kelly's point earlier, if you think of talent for the company, then you can get a little bit broader versus I need this right now to get this thing done. You probably you may want to question, is that a buy, or should I really take someone to come in from the organization and work on the build side, which Kelly will talk about, or Is this just something I should think about for a contractor, a gig worker, or something like that? So this buy side is really thinking, just like, again, you're thinking about your portfolio of stocks. Am I buying to really accelerate and for the long term, or if it is a short term?
Yes, and I'll add on the build side, much like, when a company goes through a merger and acquisition process, they are likely, part of their strategy is they're either trying to buy a skill set, or they've made the decision to buy versus build, because they said they can't build that on their own, right? They need that asset. But if we shift to build, part of the problem that we have today is we have not had visibility to that skills supply chain. Many of us have HCM systems that have traditionally given us titles of people, but they don't accurately give us a skills supply chain view. And if you think about supply chain methodology, it's always been manage your inventory against the demand so that you can execute, you can get the revenue. We need, as talent leaders, to think of that skills supply chain as managing talent assets carefully so that we have the right skills to execute strategy. So we need a way to be able to visualize in order to forecast. And if we're building more supply of something, what are our methods we do that? It could be on-the-job training and rotations. It could leverage talent mobility and talent sharing so people can contribute and learn on the job. And it could be a full reskill, upskill strategy that your company has to do based upon, machine automation. So this opportunity we have today to think about build and buy is a very, very important one, not for just those industries that are being disrupted, but all of us, because remember what we said at the beginning, we're all at the sort of the starting blocks. We had a false start, we need to go back to the blocks, so anybody can win now.
I think that's great. It's almost in a sense that now is a better time than any to really have a seat at that table and drive that strategy, given where we are, and everyone in the organization is looking to HR for that help, right, to play that role. So I guess before we kind of close today, I wanted to open it up to the audience for some Q&A too, given any questions you may have for Kelly or Robin around their experience and kind of how they're thinking about reimagining work, given where we are today. So Brianna, I wasn't sure if any have come in since we've been talking for the last 40 minutes or so.
Yeah, this is the time. Anyone in the audience, if you have questions for Robin or Kelly, I would love to get them answered for you here. I have a question, Kelly, as you were talking about the talent inventory, which I think is a really cool concept and a great new way of looking at talent. What do you see, what is captured in a talent inventory? Because you mentioned, we know people's titles and sometimes that's all we know about an employee. So what would you add to the talent inventory in addition to being able to visualize it so you have a better understanding of what you have in your workforce?
So I think what you want to know, if you actually have a talent marketplace where your work is actually getting assigned, I think you want to know what type of skills are in highest demand in your company. So that means that they're harder to find, so they're more scarce. And in return, what is your current inventory of skills overall? Because what you're looking for is gap, and the gap tells you, okay, I need a strategy to fill the gap. Is it going to be that I'm going to build more, for example, data science, by taking one strategy to look at who's got those skills or like skills and find more of those people that can turn into data scientists? Or do I have to have an active campaign to try to get those people on the outside? And so that's what I mean by having the right reporting mechanisms on that skill supply chain. Because, for example, let me just give you an example. If the CEO asks you, how much capability in data science do I have? Traditionally, you would tell him, well, we have 30 people with the title of data scientist. But what he's really asking you is an inventory, he's asking a supply question, which would be better answered in a supply chain view, because you could say, well, CEO, we have 120 people with a skill of data science. we have, 3 at this level and, 100 at this level. Then you're now getting into, wow, we may be we have under the inventory versus our demand, and it gets you into a totally different conversation.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Go ahead, Kellyanne.
Brianna, I was just going to also add to what Kelly's sharing too. Some of those skills could be transferable, right? If you think about the example of a data scientist, maybe you have folks within the organization that have a strong analytical mindset, and a way to assess for that analytical mindset to understand, could they be a fit for that data scientist role that you didn't even know because they weren't practicing or doing that role today. So other ways to also think about it is kind of as you're inventorying, thinking about and assessing them against those transferable skills or competencies as a way to understand that internal marketplace and way to understand who could be a fit for that role that maybe you hadn't considered in the past.
Yeah, so there's skill and then there's the potential for that skill, right?
And the deep learning models can actually be trained for that, by the way. So you can take maybe your ideal data scientist out of the platform, look at their skill sets, and run a correlation of anybody that has at least 3 to 5 of those skills. Because what you're referring to, Kellyanne, is who could look like this person in the future, right? Who has the base foundation for it. And then you can proactively, as in HR, proactively have a plan to build those people into your next generation of data scientists. Assuming they also, another thing in the Hitch platform is we have the aspirations of people by skills. So if you also know they have the motivation, then you've got a double whammy because you've got people that are motivated to learn it.
And I think this idea, and we talked about this before with experience, is it kind of gets into a marketing place too, is how do you market these jobs? So, I think so often when I was in an HR role, a couple of things I would hear. One is I don't even know what to aspire to because I don't know what's possible. So how are you kind of creating that's what's possible for people to look at, and how, whatever that looks like for you. And certainly the use of technology is great to be able to do that. So people can kind of go on their own and experiment and play with those things. But then, how do people know, and how do they get to kind of get their voice in there? Because, I think really none of us likes, in an organization, when you hire someone else was like, oh man, I totally would have liked to have been considered for that position because I have A, B, and C background. To Kelly's point, if we haven't inventoried it in a good way, or we haven't, I think the thing we've struggled with in HR is keeping our inventory up to date, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and if you think about operationally, businesses are really good about understanding their inventory and keeping it up to date on a regular basis. We have been more traditionally sort of once a year, maybe. So how are we making sure that we're keeping that up to date?
You mentioned one other thing that's really interesting that technology is also helping. So we can get to certain roles by very different pathways. But if we're talking about skills as the common denominator, then we can guide people on a career pathing exercise to acquire skills in their toolkit, but they can do it in their own path. They can get to the same goal and by taking a completely different path. So that's another thing that technology is now enabling, is a way to view a pathway to wherever they're going. And we know that people are going to have a portfolio of experience. They're going to have portfolio careers now, and they all will get to the same destination in very different ways. So by allowing, number one, a way to visualize a path, your path, very personalized to you, what skills are required, can allow you to reskill or upskill on your own. These are kinds of things in the technology that are going to be very, very powerful and very helpful to each individual.
I love that, like a create your own adventure.
Correct.
We have just another minute or two before I want to move on to our final wrap-up question. I have in here, can you talk more about the scarcity mindset? Kelly, I think you brought that up.
Yeah, so if we think about, we've all grown up in a world where maybe there was going to be one blue ribbon right? It's like we all got to fight for the one spot. And we've taken that into the way we manage people and we manage our financials in an organization. We set it with constraints. So by default, we live off, oh my God, I'm going to run out of time or money or headcount. And that is the mindset we go into. So we hoard as a result out of fear of losing it. Now, if we shift gears and we start talking about talent is owned by the company. So Robin mentioned drafting, which is a great example. If talent is owned, it releases everyone to, wow, I now work for a company of 5,000 people, of 10,000 people. We start to get into, I can tap the enterprise. I don't need to try to hoard or own. I actually am entering waters where I can touch any of these people and leverage them. And it doesn't mean that you have people with no day jobs, right? And it's just chaos. That's not what I mean. But I mean that you have the ability in puts and takes, because work happens in different evolutions and different paces in an organization. You have the ability to tap that. And that's the abundance mindset. That's the shift that we have to make in corporate America to allow for this kind of internal gig concept to work. And I will tell you, the company will not only save a lot of money, they're going to have high engagement levels and high retention, because people will be able to move around. They'll feel like you know who they are, that they're not just the job that they're doing today. And even for myself, had people judged me on HR alone, they would have never made me the chief innovation officer. They wouldn't have been able to see the things I had done in the past, the transferable skills that allowed me into that next role.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for digging a little bit deeper into that. Let's move on here in our last 2 minutes. I've got this final wrap-up question that I would love to hear from you, Kelly and Robin. What's the #1 thing leaders should keep in mind as they reimagine work? So we discussed a lot. This is a really big topic. What's the one thing you'd like to leave people with today? Robin, let's start with you.
I think while things are changing, they're not changing. So if you look to the Institute of the Future, they talk about skills kind of from a VUCA perspective, or VUCA, depending on how you say that, but this idea of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. If you thought that was the future, it came at you very quickly during the pandemic. So as we reimagine, we really need to think about that sort of, those ideas and what that looks like. And do we have the right people in our organization who can help us manage during those times, whether that's lead or work as individual contributors? How does that really apply? And then if we've got sort of, again, this sort of broad mindset, then we can kind of go in and say, okay, how do we now start to apply all the things we've talked about from this broad talent perspective? Because I think, as Kelly was talking, the thing that struck me is, imagine all the people who sit in jobs because their managers don't want them to go and times have slowed down, and that they're really not growing and they're not really helping the organization as they manage through those times. So how do we let that and unharness that? And again, I think it becomes sort of this mind shift, but really thinking about the VUCA as we kind of move forward.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Kelly, what would you say?
I'd say that as we all return to work, we need to manage flexibility. We need to be extremely adaptive to change. So the VUCA example is a really, really good one. And I think that we need to keep in mind that the companies that are founded on teams that are resilient and can build a muscle around resilience will be able to face the next COVID, the next crisis very differently. So, and I would engage your teams in what they learned about themselves, both personally and professionally, as a result of going through this experience. I think that taking the time to be reflective and somehow weaving that into the new future is really important, because this was, again, back to what we said earlier, everybody got thrown into the deep end. As a leader, being empathetic to that is really important. But what can we do? What did they learn? what can they bring to their new future for the company, future for themselves as a result.
I love that. Thank you so much. Kellyanne, Robin, Kelly, thank you for being on the call with us today. Everyone in the audience, thank you for sticking with us through the hour. I chatted in that SHRM code, so grab it before you go, and I hope to see everyone back for our next webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.